water. So, no human can starve for this whole 7-year period and survive. So, their alternative is they must find supplies of food. And they figured out through some process, they've been there once before now, they know that Egypt has stores of food. So God's ultimate objective is to move this entire family to Egypt, where they will be, safe, where they can multiply, and that they become the nation that He intends them to be. So it's just a lot like during the flood. We should consider how many probably people are perishing in the world due to this starvation situation, because not all of them can go to Egypt and buy food. So, story though focuses on this group of people, Jacob's family, that are going to be the foundation of the nation of Israel. So, 8 godly people survived the flood. It's interesting to see. Some 70 Hebrews, all of that family, will survive the famine quite well. But they will end up in Egypt. So God, I think, is orchestrating the physical elements of our world to force the people to move and make decisions in order to survive. Starvation is not an option, obviously. Physical sustenance is the most fundamental of human needs, isn't it? Breathing, water, and food are the basics. This might seem to be a crude way that God is using to accomplish His purposes. But He's a God who is, I think, using His knowledge of what He created. He created the entire universe and the earth and all the ecosystem in the earth. And He knows how to cause that to achieve His objectives. So what we see is the family cupboard is now becoming bare once again. Jacob, though, has been adamant to this point that Benjamin is not going to Egypt. Put his foot down. He doesn't want to lose his other favorite son, who happens also to be the baby of the family. But reality is an amazing thing. Reality forces his sons to have a very serious conversation with their father. This time, though, it's not Reuben, it's Judah who reminds Jacob of the terms or the conditions that Joseph established for them to procure more food. Joseph has set the conditions, not Jacob. So who's in the driver's seat? And who has the authority? Joseph has the authority, not his father. But they don't know who this person is. They consider him to be an Egyptian. So look at the imperatives, though, that Judah reminds Jacob that the Egyptian man used. He said, he solemnly warned us. He also said, you shall not see my face. In other words, I will not work with you. I will not intercede for you and remember we read before, Pharaoh had said, if anybody wants food from our stores, they have to deal with Joseph. So, and then he used another imperative, unless Benjamin, your younger brother, is with you. So he is established, he's kind of put them in a corner. They have to comply with his requirements in order to be able to procure more food. So then, I think Judah unloads what I call the ultimate ultimatum. He says, if you will not send him, meaning Benjamin, we will not go. Well, Jacob is not going to haul all of that grain by himself. He's an older man now. And appears that he is not willing also to send any of his servants. So it's up to his sons to procure this. And that's exactly kind of puts them in a bind. So Jacob finally realizes he doesn't have much of a choice. He's in between the proverbial rock and a hard place. What does he do, though? It's very interesting. He complains and he ridicules his own sons. He says there in verse 6, "Why did you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you still had another brother?" Really. So they answer him and tell him why they felt that they had to answer the questions directly. Joseph's questions about a father and another brother, even though he doesn't use his name, those are clever. They're very clever questions because obviously the brothers didn't realize that he already knew the answer, and what he was basically doing is putting them in a position where they had to comply with what he wanted. I think this too is an act of God. I've seen that some of God's best work is always found in details. It's the details. The brothers don't think, they don't recognize Joseph at all. That amazes me to a degree, because I can think of lots of people that I've known through the years that if I was sitting in a completely darkened room and they walked in, the first thing that's going to tell me who they are is their voice, the sound of their voice, the words that they use, the way they speak. So, again, I think maybe God is orchestrating how this reunion between all of this family is actually going to go down, not man. They think that they're in the driver's seat. We often think that even today. But it's amazing. We are not always in the driver's seat because God's working in each person's heart. He's working in the brothers. He's working in Joseph. He's working in Pharaoh. And he's working with all of the Egyptian people that are involved in this. But it's Judah this time who offers to shoulder the responsibility for Benjamin's safety, not Reuben. So if we think seriously about this, a question comes to my mind immediately. What difference would it make who's to blame? One of the brothers is going to be, responsible for if something happens to Benjamin. But does it change anything? And that's where I see, God at work. It doesn't change a thing. But that's what he offers to his father because he's trying to change the old man's mind. He's trying to get him to capitulate. So, if Benjamin is somehow compromised, of what use will it be, though, to blame anybody else for the fact that it happened? And finally, Jacob's faith, I think, kicks in. There's a little bit of a change here. In verse 14, what we notice is that there's a significant statement that Jacob makes. He says to his sons, and may God Almighty give you mercy before the man. Think of that. May God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may release your other brother and Benjamin. And then he makes this statement, if I am bereaved, in my version of the text, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved. If something happens to Benjamin, so be it. Very interesting. Jacob, though, I believe, is requesting God's intervention when he says, and may God Almighty give you mercy. Finally, he's thinking about it. And it's interesting. In John 14:14, Jesus himself tells us, if you ask anything in my name, I will do it. Matthew 21:22, Jesus again tells us, and whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive. That's a promise. That's a promise directly from God. And then we get to the book of James. James 1:6 tells us the correct attitude when we ask God for something. He says, but let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. In other words, he's unstable. And again, James says in chapter 4, verses 2 and 3, he tells us, yet you do not have because you do not ask. So that's the imperative, is that we need to ask. And then James goes on, and you ask, and the reason you don't receive is because you ask amiss. Amiss. In other words, like shooting at a target with a bow and arrow, you miss the target. Why? Because if you have doubts, if you don't have faith, God does not feel compelled to answer. So, if we look at those scriptures in the New Testament and we apply them here in Jacob's time, it's very interesting. Jacob has to have come to a change of heart regarding whether or not he will let Benjamin go with them. And he is now in a position where he has no other choice but to do exactly what this Egyptian man is asking. And God has put it in his heart that he must do that. So I believe that Jacob is asking now in faith. I love the statement I've heard expressed many times over my years of ministry. People would say to me, when I reach the end of myself, then and only then did I look to God for the answer. How many times have we all been in that place? When I come to the end of myself, when everything that I do is not producing the result that I want, then is when we actually tend to get on our knees before the Lord, those of us that know the Lord. So, Jacob knows God has never failed him in the past, in his own life. And so he's now asking God, I believe, to protect all of his sons, Judah, Benjamin, and Simeon included. His final statement essentially says, if something bad happens,